Thank you, Asma. Thank you.
Thank you, Uzma. So we at Malton Women Council today feel very, very honored to have among us Ms. Kristie White, who is an author who writes books that have in them the capacity to open, if I may say, hearts and minds. I'd like to believe the books open hearts and minds of children and adults alike. Her writing inspires people to read deeper, search further, and explore their own creative gifts. So very important in the times that we are living to be able to explore that. Now, Kristie has 5 book series centered around Indigenous children, especially for boys and the issues of literacy and boys. Her inspiration comes from Indigenous cultures. She focuses on themes that encourage independence of spirit. How important that is. That is so important in the times that we are in. Her focus on the themes that encourage independence of spirit and enthusiasm for learning and enthusiasm for celebrating all cultures, all languages, and all traditions. Kristie is a family and disability activist. She is the co-founder of Hoops for Hope. She is a board member and Indigenous program coordinator for Voices of Men 360. She has traveled across Turtle Island with her family. Each of her family members have their own unique diversity issues with their stories and their teachings. Kristie is Haudenosaunee woman. Do I pronounce that correct, Kristie?
You absolutely did. It's Haudenosaunee, so it was very close.
Thank you. Kristie is Haudenosaunee, right? Haudenosaunee?
Yeah. Haudenosaunee.
Haudenosaunee?
Yeah.
Kristie is Haudenosaunee woman from Oneida Nation, Nations of the Thames. Is that right?
Yeah.
She is a Bear Clan member. Is that right?
Yeah.
Kristie is also mother of 4 and has done so much work to uplift families and communities. Kristie has spent many years guiding the establishment about programs for families and children based on healthy living, healthy relationships, literacy, and culturally appropriate content. This is extremely, extremely important and very, very sensitive matter for building healthy communities. She has worked alongside and has been a consultant with numerous agencies across Canada. So we at Malton Women Council, this session, Chit Chat and Chai, look forward to hearing from Kristie in a way that we understand Indigenous cultures a bit better, you know? So we understand the phenomena of residential schools and what that did to the families, to the communities, to the Indigenous children. So this is a very, very important session, and we are so grateful for Kristie to be among us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to bring you everywhere. You could do my introduction all over. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. First off, I'm going to open up and say, Saguli Niyo gets Yojigel. And that's hello. And my name is Yojigel in my traditional language of Oneida. And that is my traditional longhouse name, which means cloud. And the reason I was given that name by the clan mothers is I think they seen that I was going to endure quite a storm through life and take a very different path. And so I'll start with a young girl. As a young girl, I grew up on reservation just outside of London. It's about 25 minutes outside of the city center. Unfortunately, living conditions on reserve for Indigenous people isn't the best of living conditions. I'm sure a lot of you have heard in the news, a lot of our reserves don't have clean drinking water, adequate housing. I actually grew up in a house that did not have running water. Should have been condemned. There was leaks in the roof, those kind of things. But one thing that I noticed with growing up on the reserve is I don't think we ever noticed that because we have a strong community and family bond. So as I started growing up as a young girl, started coming into the city more, life changes happen. To kind of catch you up to speed to Jay and Gizmo, which is my children's book. The reason I had joined Voice of Men 360 and started with the children's books actually came out of my own personal trauma story. And that was my father 6 years ago was murdered. And the toll that took on our family was just astronomical and took all of us on quite our own independent journeys. So to give you a little bit about my dad was an iron worker. And when I was little, I don't think I really understood what an iron worker was. And don't mind if none of you do, or if somebody doesn't, I'll explain it. An iron worker is one of the guys that go up and build all the steam beams for the big gigantic buildings we see, for the big bridges, all that kind of thing. So most of these guys, and it seems to be a lot of Indigenous men who go into the trade of being iron workers. We call them Skywalkers. So I always grew up being proud that my dad was a Skywalker. But for a lot of years, I don't think I really understood what that was until my father passed away. I realized I didn't know actually a whole lot about my dad until he passed away. Because again, with Indigenous community, when residential school system happened and under the Indian Act and the children started being taken under law to the residential schools that were run by mainly Catholic churches, the first thing that the children that happened to them when they were there is they had grooming process, and that meant their hair was cut. That was the first thing that happened as soon as they got there. They also had baths in like boiling water because at the time they believed they were disease ridden and that kind of thing. And in that started taking away our language, our Indigenous languages, because they weren't to speak those languages. If they did speak those languages, they were punished. I actually was raised in a home that I spoke my traditional language for the first couple of years when I was a child, up until we kind of amalgamated into the city more and that kind of thing. I don't think even at our age, we understood in this generation what had happened to residential school. So in the journey, it's kind of back and forth between now and that time. So in that, when the adults came out of residential school, and the other thing I want to clarify is that residential school wasn't 100 years ago. My parents both went to residential school. My mother saved me and my brother from going to residential school. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996. My firstborn child was born in 1996. And I don't think we really understood what the impacts of those schools were because we were just so busy trying to figure out where we go. We were very displaced almost, with the language being lost, culture being lost. The other thing that happened is the abuse and suffering they suffered in those schools when they were just kicked out at, you know, whatever age they decided it was okay to just let them go. they had no idea how to go back to community and, you know, be parents and be aunties or grandparents and all of those kinds of things. So Indigenous people as a whole, especially in community, are, they live pretty impoverished. So it's almost like the bottom of the barrel. So you're just kind of living life and you don't really have time to stop and do things and spend, I guess, certain moments, I would say. So when my father passed away, a bunch of his ironworker buddies were at the funeral home and they were talking about my dad and that kind of thing. And a couple of his buddies had pulled me aside and they said, "Hey, we know all about you." And I went, "Oh, wow, my daddy must have talked about me." And they started proceeding to tell me this story about when I was little. And I hadn't even thought about this in many, many years. When I was a little girl and my dad was gone a lot because of being an ironworker, he used to always, when he'd come home, he'd put his metal lunch pail up on the counter. And when I was a little girl, I used to make these little storybooks and staple them. You know, you cut the paper so they're little books, and I'd staple them up the side and write my dad's story and put it in his lunch pail. And that's one of the conversations that these men wanted to talk to me about, is because they remember my dad being so far up in the sky eating his lunch that his hands were freezing, even on a summer day. Because the higher up in the sky you go, the colder it actually gets. The other thing I found out about my father is my father couldn't read those storybooks. So he'd always have lunch with somebody who could read them to him. And these were some of the buddies who had the luxury of reading those stories to us. And that started my own journey of, how did my dad have this job and this life and this thing? And I had no idea that my dad was pretty much illiterate. So I started talking to my mom about it. And then even in that, my mom just started actually pointing out a lot of men in my life that couldn't fully read and write. So the more I started digging and the more I started looking at how this could be, why this came about, led me on my journey with boys and literacy and cultural boys and literacy. And then remembering as myself, as a cultured girl coming into the city, going to Western schools, that kind of thing, there was no content. There was no book I could pick up and see another Indigenous child, or we all know in our home as cultured people, when we walk into our homes, there's lots of things like you see behind me here. I have my Pendleton blanket. In a lot of Indigenous homes, they have them. Just like many other cultures, when you go into their home, you can see that within their space. That's what brings people comfort and connection to community, to culture, all of those things. But there was nothing for children where if you opened the book, the whole book was culturally sound. It wasn't just about taking a cultured person and putting in the middle of the story. I wanted something all children could relate to in the way of Indigenous culture, and something that could teach other children about our culture. So that way, hopefully to inspire lots of other people to enjoy our culture and share their own culture. One thing I think is beautiful is I think every culture is just beautiful. The connections you have amongst women and men and family and those kind of things are just such a cherished thing. So when you look at residential schools and what happened there, a lot of that started killing off culture, tradition, language, and just made almost these communities a very desolate people, especially when you think of there's no jobs, limited housing. Some resorts, we have 4, 5, 6 families trying to live in one house. Again, trying to make sure there's child welfare issues within the system. And as moms, I'm sure we all get, it's kind of like being stuck behind this big rock, because one of the things that these children are taken into the child welfare system is for not having clean clothes, clean bodies, brushed teeth. But then on the same hand, how is that fair when the community doesn't have adequate water? There's no clean water. And if these children intake this water, then they become sick. So it just becomes this whole thing of generation after generation after generation. Now, in this point in time, now that everyone's learning about residential schools, Indigenous issues, how Indigenous communities are, and I mean, even learning that a lot of us have Indigenous communities right in our backyard. There's some people who didn't realize that they may be only 15, 20 minutes from one of these spaces. And then we look at how can that be happening in Canada? These are the original people. So in Truth and Reconciliation, one of the biggest questions I get asked is, how can we help? Or what can we do from here? One of the main things I find is giving culture and identity back to the children. That's where it started in the way of being taken from them. That's kind of where we need to start to give it back to them. Especially as moms of cultured children. It's very, very, I don't know. It's very hard with our Indigenous children right now. It's almost soul shattering. Since the uncovery of the mass graves, our communities, I'm not really sure how to explain it. The best way to explain it, because I see we have many, many women of all different generations, I would say. The hard thing is for a lot of the younger generations, we didn't realize that a lot of us had parents that went to residential school. We had no idea that our parents had saved some of us from going to residential school. We honestly are probably just as shocked as everybody else. So in that, one of the things, as I said, that has to really, 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 and I think from a cultural background all the way around, is language, content, culture, tradition, family, and having community support is what's really, really going to help not only Indigenous communities flourish, but all communities. We have a teaching amongst Indigenous people, and it's called the medicine wheel. And sometimes when you see us on different articles or on the news, and the one thing you'll see is it's a circle. And in that circle, you have the 4 different colors. And that's what we call our medicine wheel. And what that represents, and in those colors, we have black, white, red, yellow. And then we have the cross down the middle, like to separate them. And the reason we have that is because we always honor all 4 directions, all 4 seasons, all races, and all medicines. Because for Indigenous people, we feel there's 4 sacred medicines are the first ones we use, because those are the ones we use to pray and smudge, which is tobacco, cedar, sweetgrass. And then there's one called bear root that I use. That can change almost tribal to tribal and depending on what you use, but a lot of those medicines are pretty, but that medicine wheel is something that is very transferable around. And so when we say that, the reason I go around talking about not just literacy in children, but Indigenous culture, about family connection, about those kinds of things is, hang on one second, sorry. Okay. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes, we can see. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to show you some things here. I was a little more set up as some of my technology. So. Okay. Can everybody see the hoop dancer?
Yes.
Yes.
And you see he's got those hoops.
Hmm.
Yeah.
and they're in a circle. And again, even that dance is a medicine dance because we believe everything is going to be full circle. Everything from infancy, we go through this whole life cycle, right? From infancy to child, to preteen, to adult, to elders. And it's almost like this circle of everything, circle of life. Sorry, guys. Before I get any further, does anybody have any questions? Because I tend to get a little ahead of myself, and I just want to make sure that if anybody has any questions along the way, I'm not answering.
Oh, sorry. I was just a little flustered. So I was listening to everything that you were saying, and well, so far from what I've heard, and I just wanted to, really acknowledge your bravery and your honesty to speak your truth and speak the truth of Indigenous people. And it's really heartbreaking to even take in to begin with, like the atrocities that kind of happened and what are continuing to happen, and how, like, people don't acknowledge this part of history. And even growing up in Canada, like, we learned only a side of the story, and we didn't get to see the full picture. And it's like coming to that, it's literally bringing like warmth to my face in like the most saddest way, because it's just like there's just so much. And it's like, thank you for just like talking about your experiences. Like, it's really, really brave, and I just want to commend you on that.
Thank you. That actually has to go with the whole thing about the generational talk, and us not really knowing what was going on as younger generation, especially because I know a lot of the grandmas in here, generation to generation, kind of what happened, especially with us and happened in a lot of other ethnic communities, is the older, very traditional generation were raised in a very different manner. For example, as women talking amongst us, my mother, for example, when the mass graves first came to light and all of that thing, me and my brother had to have a meeting. How are we going to even approach this with mom? Do we even, or do we just act like it's not going on? That's been a lot of struggle amongst our youth and our elders, and some of us in the middle are trying to very much mediate between the two and get them to both understand that, again, generational differences, how everybody was raised, how things are now, again, and also reminding, because a lot of our parents, especially our mothers, it's interesting, our mothers have become very like stoic, like, can we just move on? Can we talk about something else? Yes, this happened, but we're beyond it. But then you have the younger ones who, like me, had no idea of certain aspects of certain people who went to residential school in my family. So again, I'm so glad that we are getting the truth now and we are being able to speak about it. But that is one thing I do want to say about it being so blown up, is anything you're sharing, anything when you're talking about, especially myself, when it comes to Indigenous stuff, I really, really try and look at the fact of this could actually cause trauma on top of trauma. And we're seeing this, especially in our older women. Our older women are really struggling because a lot of them, this is something that, okay, yes, it happened. We moved on. We're now mothers and wives and those kinds of things. So a lot of those children are just like, what do you mean my mother went to residential school? And then when you went, the next action that happened past residential school is what we call day school. And that's when the children stopped actually living there, but they were going to school there during the day. A lot of us had no idea that the schools that we were going to as children were actual day schools still run by the church. So even that in itself, we've all had to go, whoa, we thought we were in schools just the same as everybody else. So that's one thing I will say that is really, really, really going on in the Indigenous communities right now, is the trauma impact. We have a lot of elders, we have a lot of youth who are trauma responding. So we have a lot of very relationships that are strained. So again, really trying to focus on how we get our communities back to communal, how we get back to really focusing on how we can move forward from this, how to get out of the poverty we're in, out of the boxes the government puts us in. That's another thing, especially for ethnic people, I cannot stand is these boxes. Like I myself will never get to be Kristie White, the children's author, ever. Till the end of time, I will always be Kristie White, the Indigenous children's author. And the problem you get into with that is there's 1,000 spaces in the world for people's projects if I was just a children's author. The struggle for Indigenous people gets worse when you only have 10 spaces for, say, an Indigenous author. What if you have 15 or 20 of us? So the system in itself and putting people in these cultural, ethnical boxes, as much as people think it helps by them saying, oh, they have Indigenous this and Indigenous that. Again, why do we have to have Indigenous this, Indigenous that? That doesn't sound like equality to me. That doesn't sound like still being treated as everybody else. So again, those struggles, especially with our women entrepreneurs, our women who are just struggling moms. We have a lot of them. It's interesting how many of our moms get into their own little home-based entrepreneurial businesses, just trying to manage their children, like being able to feed them and clothe them and buy the water that they need, because like on reserve, as I said, a lot of times you have to buy water. And that also for a lot of moms is taking a trip into the city. So if you don't have transportation, you have to arrange that transportation. You have to be able to get there, get the water, get back. So again, it's the other thing is questions we a lot of get is, why is it like this? What's caused this? Other than residential schools. One thing I want to bring to light is what we is called the Indian Act. And a lot of people don't know that the actual Indian Act is a law. So let's say myself and any one of you was out doing something together, and we both get stopped by the police, and we have to hand over our ID. On my status card, which the government gives us, oh, and I'd like to very nicely point out that the only thing numbered in Canada under bloodline is pigs, cows, dogs, and Indigenous people. And on our status card, on the bottom of it, it'll say Kristie White is an Indian under the Indian Act. And the reason it states that is because now, no matter what's going on, we could be doing the same thing. That shows the officer that the laws have now changed. You get to be under Canadian law, and I'm under the Indian Act. The Indian Act solely was to completely eradicate Indigenous people. That's what the whole thing was for, was to create something called enfranchisement. The first attack of it was on our men, because as we know, the colonial view is men are these strong providers and all of that. So what they started doing is enfranchising men. And what that was is that they made them British citizens, and took away all of their status rights, land, all of that. But also under the Indian Act, because it's been going on for so many years, they had started putting provisions under the Indian Act, like we can't have franchises. So we can't, even if somebody, say, had enough money to maybe buy into a McDonald's, we can't do that. It's against the law. Same with grocery stores, because they're considered a commercial thing. we're not allowed to have them because it's against the law. When Canadians start realizing what the Indian Act is and how that actually starts constraining one demographic of people, then they start understanding where some of these issues are coming from, especially when Indigenous people make up 7% of the whole Canadian population. As mothers, I'll give you an appalling number. If we only make up 7% of the Canadian population, 60% of Indigenous children are in care.
I think there are some signal issues.
Yes, the screen is frozen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
the screen is frozen.
I
That-
can't believe that this is Canada.
Unbelievable. I mean, how can one continue to live as a segregated community? We sometimes have, some communities have such kind of feeling in India, but in Canada,
Yeah.
it's surprising and saddening.
Seeing their reserve in Brantford, it's terrible actually.
I think Kristie is back now.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Kristie.
Kristie, unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, we're getting storms in the area, so I just glitched out for a minute.
Hmm.
So yeah, for the segregated community, that's exactly it. And that's one of the things that why we're doing the donation stuff and that kind of thing through Voice of Men 360 is because, again, on reserves, like to give you an example, I actually live in London. I am in the city. I am at home on Oneida a fair bit, actually just about daily. The thing is we have we're actually called a tri-community because we have 3 different tribal nations that we're all actually kind of forced together in a sense. So we have 3 reserves right together, which is Oneida Nation of the Thames, Chippewa Munsee, and Delaware Nation. So you have 3 reserves of different tribal populations, and we have 0 jobs, 0 housing, 0 anything. So what started happening is people were coming into London hoping to be able to find housing, jobs, that kind of thing. The problem with that is because how the system is, and again, we have to go into these boxes, so everybody's fighting for very limited resources. A lot of the population of the homeless people now in London are Indigenous. The amount of homeless women we're seeing is actually starting to get scary. The amount of families as a whole unit we're starting to see homeless is starting to get very, very scary for our communities. The family part has to do with this whole the rent stuff, and we have this whole thing in certain cities where landlords are kicking out Indigenous families so that way they can jack up the rent and get somebody else. I actually cried the other day. I seen a ad listing somebody sent me for a ad for an apartment, and it clearly states on there, Indigenous people, please do not apply. It's getting heartbreaking. But I think one thing, as being a segregated community, in one way that's been a benefit is our culture and traditions are still, they're really, really, really rooted now. As our youth are starting to learn more about, our different ceremonies, and, we have a certain, like our 20 and 30-year-olds now are really, really stepping up and participating now that they're learning more about what happened with residential school and why the system is the way it is and what happened. I think a lot of it is a lot of us grew up very desolate because we didn't understand why we always were at the bottom of everything. Whereas now they're seeing that the more we can educate, the more we can talk about our stories, the more we can share our powerful stories of our ones who have triumphed. One woman I'd like to share about is my mom. My mom's an Indigenous woman who joined the Canadian Forces. She actually went to Carleton University, got an honors degree in business. I mean, and when all this happened, for all the years of everything I couldn't understand, the one thing I said to her the other day was, I am so proud of you. Because when you start really learning about that system fail and you see how much our parents, both mom and dad, everybody, grandma, grandpa, really, really, really put in to survive the system and keep going and making it so we're all here to be able to talk to everybody about our story. I mean, a lot of us have really, really started to empower our parents, our grandparents, and just remind them that, yeah, you went through this. Sorry, I get emotional. That, yeah, they went through this as children, but now we're here and we got them and they're safe. And they did some really incredible things just to keep our future generations going. So that way we can do these things like write the books and bring back our language and our culture and just have inclusivity for everybody. Our culture and tradition is all about love and acceptance of everybody. And, you know, the peace and harmony. And of course, you're going to have your days. Everybody's going to have their days. And nobody said creator was perfect. But I think a lot of it is now is really looking back that we can really understand the system now that's in place, because a lot of people didn't know it was there, including ourselves. We always got told we couldn't do things, but I don't think we really understood why we couldn't. We just knew we weren't allowed to do certain things. Whereas now, the more that education is coming out, and the more we're hearing these stories too, just amazing stories of like men and women that, you know, listening to them, we've got a bunch of the residential school survivors that have been kind of getting together for little coffee groups and whatever, because they're talking about the graves and everything. As hard it is for them, us who are there supporting them, it's amazing to hear the stories of just perseverance and all the stuff they went through in life just to get to where they are, so that we could stand here and go, wow. And that's the thing, is any person of culture and ethnicity coming from different parts of the world coming into Canada, I think that's something they can relate to, is just the fact under culture and that kind of thing, just during certain things that happen in our worlds, in our countries, when it comes to culture and that, some of our elders are just amazing when we hear those stories and we share those stories. And that's just my big thing, is getting out there and helping, especially empowering women to be okay to say, okay, so this happened, and just talk about it. And I understand, because as women, we got so many other things to do. There's a house to clean. There's babies to take care of. There's husbands to take care of. There's floors to wash. But remember, your connection in life later will be with those little ones who want to hear your story. And now I take every opportunity I can to ask my mom a billion questions. I'm driving her nuts. But again, just if you remember, every single one of us holds a story dear that we heard about somebody we love, and we heard it from somebody else. And that's what causes those super deep connections, especially amongst women. We have something in us that just needs to be so connecting and so whole and so loving and caring. And so when our women have, and our men, especially my dad too, had to become so strong and just so, you know, we got to get this done. We got to get through life. And I appreciate that so much more now. But now I want to spread the word that please share your stories. Everybody. And I mean, I don't care if you're 2, I don't care if you're 80. I don't care if you want to email me in the middle of the night. I would love to hear your story, because I think that's really, really what connects people around the world to humanity, is sharing and caring and just loving. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Kristie, it's so overwhelming. It's very emotional.
Yeah.
I came here in 1999. I am a Canadian citizen. I want to apologize. I don't know why. This is the side we don't know what is going on. We have seen the other side of Canada. It's very brutal. It's very heartbreaking. I don't know what to say.
It's interesting because I have a lot of friends, actually, and Sibom's been wonderful at teaching me all about his culture. And I mean, I'm always a sponge with him too. So it's always like, just tell me more. And one thing I really learned after the mass graves was I had so many of my other friends of different cultures calling me. And I think what was so hard for them is, one, they never really realized what was going on with Indigenous people and those kind of things. But also, two, depending on where they were coming from in the world, how similar it almost emotionally felt like home. And, you know, different conflicts in the world, those kinds of things. One thing they said to me that actually made me stop and think is, this is the same kind of war as back home, except for the buildings aren't blowing up. That's why people don't see it. And that, I didn't even know what to say to that. Because in all honesty, looking at other conflicts around the world and looking at my friends and where they've come from and learning more and sharing our stories now, I'm learning more and more that, yeah, it is very similar to some of the countries I've come through in different times and conflict and all those kinds of things. And I think if, you know, and I would never want to see that, but I think if there was more of a boom, 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 they'd realize what's really going on with their original people here and what's gone on for years and years and years. Like, even as of today, the number is at 5,129 babies. The Truth and Reconciliation Act only has 3,000 documented. We still have 36 schools to check, including one that my family went to. And when we look at that, that's what starts getting devastating. The other thing is, too, is why we're trying to promote awareness and education is the Child Welfare Act and the child welfare system has now become the new residential school. Because with 60% of our children being taken into care, when they all age out, their numbers will be more than what went to residential school.
Jimita ji. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Aloka ji.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
चलो हाँ
हाँ,
बोलो
मीता आप बोलो.
हाँ बोलो बोलो कोई नहीं.
So, Kristie, like we, as Uzma said, we are Canadian citizens, but we are also first generation immigrants.
Yeah.
So when we came to Canada, we came for better life here, better than the life that we were having in our country. And that when you uproot yourself from your home country and come to a new country, and you are abiding by the ways of that country, that's a lot of struggle, lot of struggle before you have a roof on your head and you have a job. You know, your whole time is going into just making sure that this uprooting that you went through makes sure at least that you have a roof on your head, and you know, you have just enough. So that takes a lot of time. And it's after quite a few years that that one realizes, one gets very involved in one's own struggle, and then it's only for many of us, I think, very recently, especially with the children's graves, you know, that we are trying to see what is this, because a lot of South Asian community, yeah, there is many challenges in our countries, but we didn't experience this kind of behavior. You know, this is too much that this happened, and this happened on a land where we are making better lives for ourselves, you know. So as you are sharing with me, so I don't know very much, but as you are sharing with me that you are, and I apologize for my ignorance here, that as you are sharing with me that your reserve on which you lived is near London, and that it doesn't have clean water. And so I am thinking, because I have been a teacher in this Peel region for 20 years, and I'm very aware that any family who comes here from no matter where in the world, their children have to go to a public school. Yeah. You know, when they are, if they are 4 years old, it is required.
Under the Indian Act here, our children have to, by law, Indigenous children have to be registered in a public school at 5.
But what I want to understand, that is for all children, you know, in PV. But what I want to understand is when on a reserve, when you told me that you live on a reserve, and there isn't clean water and there is not proper housing. So I want to understand that the community who lives on reserves, they don't have school there.
Not all of them do. No, we do have one on Oneida, but it only goes to grade 6, and then they're bused into either Strathroy Caradocs or London.
But how is that, like here, when even new families come, right? They find a basement or something, and they at least have clean water, you know. But what I'm trying to, and the school that is in my neighborhood where I live has a very good building. I cannot imagine that how is it that people who were the original people, you know, of this country, how are they living in a way that there isn't proper housing and fresh water, proper water, and is there a school building there? Like, this is shocking to me.
Okay, so as a teacher, probably will be very, very shocking. A lot of the reserves don't have schools. If they do, it's like a schoolhouse. Our reserve.
How does our government justify? Like, why?
Because of the Indian Act. Unfortunately, that's a whole other law. One of my ethnic friends taught me, I guess, similar to some other ethnicities would be the liberty law. that's something similar to what, if you actually look it up, the Indian Act. So the Indian Act is actually a bunch of laws that only affect Indigenous people and reserves.
So under the Indian Act, I will definitely tonight look at that. But under the Indian Act, like if you come under the Indian Act, you don't, your children don't go to school?
Yeah, they do, but they'll be taken into main communities. Like here, our children are bused into London, into the city center, and then bused back to the reserve.
Oh.
Like
So
when I was a kid, I rode the bus into town to go to school and rode it back out to the reserve at the end of the day.
So how is the city, like the city, how come there is no provision for proper housing, and how come there is no provision for proper drinking water? Like what is this reserve coming under? What land is it?
Federal government is who runs the Indian Act, because the Indian Act is an agreement between the Crown and Indigenous people. So we fall under federal jurisdiction. That's the other thing that's different. And honestly, so there's a book that just came out not too long ago, and I think it's called 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act. And I'd honestly suggest anybody who wants to read up on the Indian Act to read that, or even just Wikipedia, Google it. You'll start seeing it's a really, really, really in-depth, complex question, because the problem is under the Indian Act, there are laws that are there that actually prevent a lot of reserves from building schools, from building medical buildings, from building anything like that. And I understand for Canadians or, well, anybody who is an Indigenous, it's really hard to understand. What do you mean there's two laws? But legit, there is a law for Canadians and immigrants, and there is a law for Indigenous people. Two different laws. And it was a law completely set up, a bunch of laws completely set up to eradicate the Indigenous people. That's why they're set up the way they are, to keep Indigenous people in poverty and stuff, because it was originally to completely eradicate them.
But is it not possible to change it now? Because no?
No, because the problem is that law is tied in with our treaties. The Canadian government, the only way they want to change it right now is they'll work on the Indian Act if we'll sign off on the treaties. And as a culture and what we believe in, we're not willing to sign off on our land and water for them to garbage it more just to play wheel and deal to have some sort of equity or substantial life. And that's the problem. Is another thing is too, is the Canadian government doesn't really understand when we say they're in violation of the treaties and stuff. You have to remember, this was agreements made with the Crown before Canada kind of went off on its own. That's why we have an Indigenous Justice Minister and everything. The Queen and King left a trust fund to take care of the Canadian Indigenous people. At one point, Canada cashed some of it out to give out the stimulus fund. They cashed that out to get themselves out of a huge pipeline debt. And they don't tell the Canadian people where this magic money comes from that they always seem to come up with. The problem is there is a trust that was left for the Canadian government to use to take care of Indigenous people. They're using it to take care of Canadians and not Indigenous people. The whole deal right now that they're offering us in the way of the Indian Act is what they're calling self-governance. And it sounds really good on the surface. But what the idea is essentially is they'll take all the assets that we have as an Indigenous people, divide them equally amongst each reserve, and pretty much if you make it, you make it, and you tank it, they take the land and resources of that reserve. Here's the problem we have. There are some reserves who have different federal legislation than others. So for instance, the reserve of Six Nations near Brantford, they have a racetrack, they have a little strip mall, they have more housing than we do because of their agreement with the Crown. Oneida does not have the same agreement because we are actually the only band that is on the Canadian side. We actually are an American tribe. But the reason we came here is because we were told that if we bought our land like Canadians, we'd be free from the Indian Act. When you read about the Indian Act, you'll see that in every second line, they'll put, including the ones who bought their land. There's only one reserve in Canada who bought their own land, and that was Oneida Nation of the Thames. It's documented, it's actually listed as a settlement. They amalgamated us under the Indian Act because that's where they wanted all Indigenous people to be.
I think after listening to Kristie, what I feel is that we need another session to be familiar with the first why this discrepancy, this isolation is there, because I have heard from friends that Indigenous people were the people who in fact taught everything to the immigrants when they settled over here, so far as the farming is concerned, so far as the land system is concerned, how to approach the villages, how to create villages, how to cook even meals, how to store food, etc. But why those people were deprived of, this is, I think, every one of us is trying to understand. That from where this Indian Act came over here on the land of Canada. This is something very, very important. And I think because you have spent all of your life to educate people around, and still, see, this is something, first lecture for us. So to understand the problem fully, I think we have to have a series of lectures on this issue. This is what I feel.
Absolutely. And I'd be willing to come back and do this more and more. We could pick a topic and go from there. It's just interesting. It's so difficult because honestly, it's almost like any situation you get into, whether you're talking about the Education Act, if you're talking about the water, if you're talking about housing, if you're talking, the problem is it comes down to every time we figure out, we think we have a solution other than strictly living how we do off the land and those kinds of things. The Indian Act has always had a policy. It's almost like they're always one step ahead. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was one who enacted what they called the white paper. And he called it that. And he was very open about his whole plan was to eradicate Indigenous people. That was documented. I mean, it's all over the place. So I think, yeah, sharing more about how this started in the way of the Indian Act and how different issues. And I think that's why it's so hard for some people to understand, is because Canadian law for Canadians works a certain way. And I understand if you're an educator, if you're a social worker, if you're a policeman, if you're any of those things, you are taught a mandate, you're taught ministry laws, you're taught those things. What they don't teach you, though, is if you were a teacher and then went to teach on a reserve, you're learning a whole new mandate and a whole different set of laws that you would not know unless you were actually working with the people that affects.
Was there any attempt from the indigenous people to scrape this act, or so that you people are treated at par with the rest of the communities? Was there any attempt in the past?
Yeah, there's been numerous attempts. Like, I mean, for years and years and years and years and years. But again, the problem is because it starts with the agreement with the Crown and the resources. When Canada established, that's why it was the Indian Act was enacted, is they figured if they eradicated at that point the Indigenous people, they could get the lands and all of that the Crown had given to the Indigenous people.
Because it looks very funny that you are going to occupy the territory of other people and you are creating laws which are going to punish them. This is bad.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Very bad.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's happened. Like, and we don't understand either. We've gone to the federal government numerous times. What makes me different than anybody else? But even on any paperwork, this day and age, the next time, and I don't think a lot of us even pay attention. You kind of used to the box you tick off, but I've noticed on every single form, there's always a, are you Indigenous?
Because here the friends, most of the Asians are sitting, I think, in this gathering. And we as Indians, we were also invaded by the outsiders for, I think, more than 1,000 years. Sometimes by Lodis, sometimes by Pathans. And then our people fought with them a long battle, and ultimately pushed them back. And of course, we have our problems now, but there is nobody from outside who is there to rule us like this.
Yeah. And I mean, we've had our conflicts. I mean, there's one you can look up, Oka, and that happened in Quebec. The problem is when we have conflicts like that, they try and make it out very much that we're just crazy people. The Oka conflict, the sad part is we had a 14-year-old girl stabbed by an RCMP officer right on the front line. When if you look at the Standing Rock stuff over the water thing, they will come in all force. They do not care when it comes to Indigenous people. I've literally been dragged across ground, pavement, and everything else by all levels of police forcing in this country. Yeah, when it comes to Indigenous people, even trying to stand up for our own, they will call in the army if they need to.
Oh, that is the problem.
Yeah.
And in fact, you see, to defend the territory, the nation living over there, the so-called Indigenous people anywhere in the world, they should have enough strength to guard their territory. This is very important. And I think you people, you missed that point like us back in India, as we had this problem centuries ago. So I think that single mistake on the part of the Indigenous people to guard their territories is all these troubles they are germinating because of that, isn't it? How do you feel?
I think so. I think when the Indian Act was first enacted and they started coming and scooping kids, and there was language barriers, there was lots of things that just weren't understood. You had no choice when they were still, like, they were literally pulling children out of mother's arms that didn't speak the language and had no idea what was going on, that they had enacted this law in Canada that stated all Indigenous children were to be taken to residential school and no questions asked.
Right. Your behavior was that of a gentleman. Come, most welcome. Most welcome.
Yeah. And I mean, and believe me, you are so right, because we have, and I know people are probably like, whoa, what do you mean? Here's my thing. We have what we call wampum belts, which is part of our traditional teachings. And we do have one that's called two canoes. Right. And you might have seen that when you see Haudenosaunee Iroquois wampum belt, and it's like a white line, a purple line, a white line, a purple line, and a white line. And what that actually represents is those two canoes. As you said, when people started coming here, yes, we were very eager to help them, teach them. Yeah. And I do agree, maybe if we just weren't so, welcoming, we probably would not be in the position we are. Actually, I'd probably most definitely say we would not be. But the problem is by culture and tradition, we were taught to
That
be
was-
welcoming to newcomers.
That was the duty of a good human being you did
Yeah.
at that time. Yeah, that should have been done, of course. This is the other people who they should have understood that if they are so generous, they are welcoming us, we should be good to them and we should uplift them also.
Yeah. Well, they did. They gave us blankets full of smallpox. That was their return. I mean, if you look in Indigenous history, that was the worst part is back in those days of Christopher Columbus and stuff, they were purposely giving Indigenous communities smallpox infected blankets.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank
We
you.
have questions from Parshinder ji and Meeta ji
And Asma.
and Asma ji.
Meeta, you wanna go ahead
Parshinder
first?
ji, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Yes, please, Prashinder.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much, Kristie, for all the details and information because most of us are very unaware of the situations and being an Indian and came here 30 years ago for betterness as Alokaji has explained already. So we thought this is the country which give us the better future, and we did. And so many Indians that they are dying to come to Canada because they think that it's a heaven on the earth, the most the beautiful country, and then they will be safe here. But since I work with Indigenous people a lot from my work, so I was diversity specialist and like I am and a UPS, so I work with so many times, but did not know the core history of Indigenous people, like how they went through. And I apologize, I'm sorry what happened. Now I'm emotional.
Yeah.
But like for Indians, we are very supportive, and then like whenever we talk, we are so like in touch with the whatever happened with your elders, your forefathers, but our support is there. So we understand how it is, and I can understand how the mothers and kids they feel when they were separated. So for the isolation and for the segregation from the community and the family is very hurtful. So thank you so much for sharing and giving us the inside education to understand, and then maybe we can work together and we have all the support with you guys. Thank you so much.
Meeta ji, are you there? Prashinder, you are so right. We are here to support. In many occasions, I know that we do land acknowledgement, but we don't understand what we are saying and how we can contribute positively. It's just a piece of paper we are reading. We need to do something practically as well. Whatever we can do, we are there. Just let us know. Yes, Meeta ji.
Actually, we can talk about land acknowledgements for a second. I'm actually not a big fan of them. I'll be honest. And I think you are not actually the first woman who's kind of tried to broach that subject with me. I think right now it's a very touchy subject, but I would like to talk about it.
Sure, because we don't know what it is.
Please do.
It has become very much, now, don't get me wrong. I do appreciate the effort that people put in. And I do appreciate the fact that not everybody knows really what is right and what is wrong. So believe me, I would never, ever discount anybody for doing a land acknowledgement. My thing is when you're doing a land acknowledgement, the ones I don't like is the fact that, we are on the land of the people of so-and-so. And those are the type of land acknowledgements that Indigenous people don't like. You can state, yes, we are on Indigenous lands of the original Indigenous people. But the thing is this is one thing we're trying to teach the Canadian government. Nobody owns the land. Creation does. We were just sent here to protect it. So when you do land acknowledgements, again, it's very much about remembering Indigenous people. But again, it kind of gets crazy because we were displaced all over the place, even as tribal nations, that sometimes some people are doing a land acknowledgement of, oh, you know, this is the territory of so-and-so, when that's actually not their original territory. So those are the kinds of things. So when we do a land acknowledgement, right? One thing I really, really think that makes a really good in the way of the land acknowledgement is remembering to remind people the reason we're on that land. We're on that land of Indigenous people. We need to take care of it. We need to take care of the waters. And essentially it's because realistically, as everybody knows, we need water. Water is life. And our women teachings, and that's why a lot of us women, you'll see when it comes to the water, it's women warriors on that front line demanding water and those kinds of things. And the reason that is because we are taught we are the life bringers. And when we have those babies inside of us, they're completely surrounded and protected by what? Water. We hold that water inside us. We need that water for life. And essentially, you can't drink oil and you can't drink money. The biggest problem when we get into the pipelines, and I'll be honest, is that not every Indigenous person is anti-pipeline. We have pipelines through different territories right now. We have no problem with that. What we're having a problem with is the greed that comes from the Canadian government on the simple fact is if you do the research, we have more than enough resources in Canada to keep Canada going. What's happening is Canada is selling those resources to other countries at a deficit. So they need more and more and more. The problem is again, everyone take a look at what happened with coronavirus as an example. That came from another country out of nowhere, and nor do I blame anybody. But again, what is Canada going to do? You have to think, have you ever seen the drill sites for a pipeline? Anybody? They're massive. Like probably we could put 3 of us women standing on each other's shoulders and one may touch the top and the bottom woman's feet would be on the bottom. And they're digging into the ground and they don't care if they're digging up our old graves. They don't care that they're digging up our elders and stuff. But yet we keep reminding them there's a lot of diseases around the world that were here a long, long time ago. And where are those bodies? In the ground they're digging up. And a lot of those diseases can, if disturbed, mutated, and all of that, be put in the air. So we've asked them time and time again. That's why we asked them not to run it through our reserves and stuff, because a lot of them are running over sacred burial grounds. Again, just trying to protect everybody. Same with the waters, same with the air. And I mean, I talk to water warriors all the time, the women warriors. And when it comes to Canadian people, we don't exactly get it, because what is going to happen when you can't give your children water? Is that when things will change? The problem with that is it'll be too late. Everything will be so tainted. The more pipelines that pour into that water, the more it gets tainted, the more children who can't, well, anybody who can't drink the water. This is becoming atrocious. If you look in Flint, Michigan, did you know you can set their water on fire with a match? Yeah. This water crisis is getting out of hand and people are not seeing the real thing of what's going on. And that's why as women, have you noticed in the last while as women, we're all over the place. We feel like we're not grounded, and no matter what we do, you got to remember we're connected to that water and what's going on with it all around the world. We have all this weather, all this stuff all around the world. Why is that? Because too much of our natural resources, our Mother Nature, is being disrupted. We're not being the caretakers we're supposed to be. We're not caring that, I mean, yes, you can have some money and you can have oodles and noodles of money. And yes, oodles and noodles of money is nice. But whatever happened to just having what you needed to be comfortable? And sharing wealth. And not just, I mean, money, but love and gratitude and sharing resources that we have here. I don't know if any of you have gardens this year and noticed they're a little different. Again, the weather patterns, all those kinds of things. Is Canada really ready to adjust to the situation at hand?
Thanks for sharing, Kristie. Jimita ji.
First of all, thank you for having Kristie here. And Kristie, thank you for sharing all the truth, the facts. Of course, we don't know anything. Even if we read, I'm not a political person, but I do read a lot about so many things. So when this water issue came, in fact, I came across news also that some leaders of the opposition had demanded from the federal government that if you came to know that a particular area in any of the other, say Brampton, people are not drinking water, what would they do? Would they think twice about it? They wouldn't. So the drinking water is the basic thing, which is the duty of the government, of any government, to provide to its citizens. We are totally with you in this matter. And in fact, you also pointed out, I had raised my hand at that time. And in fact, you had answered yourself. You pointed out this fact that calling Indigenous as Indigenous itself somehow sounds, I won't call it derogatory, but segregates them. It segregates the community from people of Canada, whereas the Canada is formed by so many immigrants from so many different parts of the world, right? So the people who were living here, of course, it was at that time some greedy rulers, their thoughts, their way of ruling, they had ruled like India also and so many other countries of the world. The empire was so big. And they had this kind of thought, they had this kind of... So my question is, you have representation in the federal government, right? You have some representation. So what is being done by your representative in the federal government? I will not go into the Indian Act, okay? Let us not think of, it is getting it removed, eradicated. It's a very, very big task, and so many countries of the world will be involved in this. But what I want to ask is that simple thing as providing drinking water, okay? So what the representative of the Indigenous people in the federal government is doing. And secondly, if you have if you have any social organizations, some non-profit organizations yourself, like you are a leader yourself, you are speaking so well about it. Are there any, because such things can be achieved as an organization. In an individual capacity or even as women alone, you cannot do it. So as an organization, if there is any organization which includes men and women both, right? And my third question is about the youth. So how the youth, the indigenous youth is working about it? Are they united on it? Are they really working as a union about, improving the living conditions? What is happening? I just want to know that. Thank you.
Okay, so start with question one. Depending on who you ask is who we have as representation. And believe me, I am like you, I'm not as political as you might think. I just get political like you. When I see something, I go, I need to know more. Mm-hmm. So the big thing with that is, unfortunately, I will not go into it, but again, the representation in the House for Indigenous people for the government side is the Governor General, because that's who represents the Queen. So unfortunately, it does go back to the Indian Act. And I think there's something I need to clarify, because you may not know. I am not a Canadian citizen.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Oh, and I see everybody's faces.
Really?
I am not a Canadian citizen. Indigenous people are actually listed as North American citizens, so that way they do fall under the Indian Act, just like immigrants fall under immigration policy. So, I am not a Canadian citizen.
Does that mean that then you can freely go all over in India, in USA and Canada, because you? So all people who are written as Indian people go all over, wherever, USA, Canada, Turtle Island?
Okay, so in order to have status, Indigenous status in Canada, that's why I'm saying it's actually listed off your bloodline. Once it gets to a certain point, it actually will, especially if you start, intermixing and stuff, that'll actually start dying off, right? I am full Indigenous. My mom and my dad are both Indigenous. So under the Indian Act, because again, this was an agreement, it was called the Jade Treaty. And at that time, that was an agreement between Canadian Indigenous, the Queen, and some sort of politician in the States, where Canadian Indigenous people can go straight across, right, from Canada, US, Mexico, and then they can do the same, Mexico, US, Canada. But again, it sounds great, but the problem with that is again, we're under a whole different set of laws because we're North American citizens. We're not Canadian or American citizens. And that's why when everyone keeps asking the questions, I think that's where the confusion is the fact that you base laws.
Are you allowed to
you don't vote?
Are you allowed to own land anywhere? Are you allowed to study? Like I heard that Indian people don't have to pay taxes. They can.
That's not true. I'll explain. Okay. So let's start with
my associated. Sorry, I'm interrupting. So my connected question is: so do you vote?
Okay, we'll start with that one on the voting.
Yeah.
Okay. We are allowed to vote, but we were only given the right as an Indigenous people to vote in 1960.
Oh.
The year my mother was born, just so you know. Actually, she goes on about that. The year she was born was when Indigenous people were given the right to vote. So when the Indian Act was involved, we had no right to vote. So this day and age, yes, we can vote, but when the Indian Act was enacted, we did not have the right to vote.
Oh my God.
So that's
like there is a lot of mess. Lot of mess.
It's a lot of cover up, to be honest. The Canadian government really does not want people to see what has gone on.
So I think for it to be fixed, like the queen made some agreement with somebody, and as a result, all the generations are suffering, you know. So the way it started was that Columbus came to this land when there was no idea that land was being owned by people anywhere in the world.
Right.
And everywhere people thought that land was the mother and it didn't belong to anybody, right?
Right. So what
things have
happened though is when
changed.
they came over, we were the only ones here. They needed to get the hand up to get the resources that were here. So in order to do that, they had to pretty much conquer and do what they did.
Conquer people who were helping them
Yep.
settle down
Because we owned it.
because their culture, because the
Yeah.
Indian people's culture had a bit like the South Asian culture, Atithi Devo Bhav. That means, you know, the
Guest is
the
welcome.
guest is like, it has to be revered. That's a South Asian culture too. So
Yeah.
that's Indian culture like that. But I think
Okay.
there's a lot of mess that you know, sometimes in a family, Kristie,
Yeah.
mess happens, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So there is a lot of mess here. And
Yeah.
then the younger people now, just like how Parshindar's daughter came, you know, Parshindar's daughter came and said that this is terrible. We've got to do something about it. So I think younger people have to be taught by, like, I have to share with my children that in this, like, I brought my children up in this land, even though it was so difficult. I brought them here on this land because I could see that they would have a better life as women in this country. And I'm sure Meeta sent her sons here also because she could see that they would have better life. And so a lot of us, you know.
Yeah.
But it's now just like how when I came here, I saw my background was theater, dance, and I saw that we did not have, South Asian people had no representation. Like, it was all very white, the theater and the dance world. So I taught them. I went into jobs which were not my profession jobs because there was no jobs as a dancer, Kathak temple dancer. There's no job. But I took a job somewhere else, like as a teacher, but I educated them that you need to write your own plays about your culture, plays about all different cultures. You have to do things. If you pursue arts, you have to also bring in the richness of the arts of your roots, you know.
The crazy thing is back to that. We have tons of amazing stuff like that, but a problem is it doesn't get to mainstream because
wonderful hoop dancer.
Yeah.
From Alberta.
Yeah. So we have amazing things. It doesn't seem to reach mainstream for, again, the boxes of Indigenous. If y'all look at, there's a channel on cable called APTN. It's the Indigenous Network. Check it out. We have amazing skills. We have amazing art and dance and
but
theater.
what I'm saying is that I think Kristie, it is our duty now to take like a lot of us are shocked. I can see the face, like Uzma's face, you know, shocked. But I think what we have to do, we have to talk to our future generations.
Yeah.
That from what I'm hearing from you, like in a family, there are so many messes. Now there is so many messes. What is this Indian Act made by the Queen and done by the, like, this has to be looked at by young, brilliant people. Like, I will talk to my children and I would say, what is this nonsense going on this land where I brought you for better life? But how can
I do want to, one of your questions though, I do want to kind of do your Mythbusters quickly though, because it'll go back into, I think, where you're going with this. what people are taught. So you were talking about the taxes. So I'll explain. These are really simple to clarify. If I live on reserve, I don't have to pay taxes. But on the same hand, I can't sell the property I own there to say you. I can only sell it to another Indigenous person.
But then you don't even have anything on the reserve. You don't even have fresh water.
If you cannot sell your property, that is, I think, that is for your benefit also at the same time, because otherwise people will be owning your land also.
Yeah.
So reserve land will be gone. So my opinion is that it's, of course, we have to educate our younger children, but about the whole of rest of the Canadian people, of course, to the suitability of some people, these laws are not being changed, modified. There is no even today, someone says that drinking water is to be provided. That is questioned. Drinking water, basic necessity, is to be provided, is being questioned even today in 2021. Right? So
exactly.
My thought on this is that there is lot of we all have to be united in this matter. How you think that this can be achieved?
I think a lot of it is a lot like this, sharing and educating, especially for Indigenous women, building support networks, especially outside with other like women's circles and that. You have to remember, we've had a lot of lateral violence and stuff, and really unsupportive behavior that starts coming out of this, because again, just the situation that especially Indigenous moms are put in start becoming almost cutthroat, right? Like everyone's competing. When you see an Indigenous mom out shopping, please, give her a waiver or something. A lot of people don't know that 80% of Indigenous families live in poverty. I will say, even myself, there are times that we have to pick and choose who's eating because we can't afford to eat all the time. Because again, we only get to have Indigenous jobs. A lot of Indigenous jobs, if you ask a lot of people, are contract work. They're not like hired in position. So again, that's why they say, oh, they don't have to pay taxes. Well, nobody has to pay taxes when they're locked into contract work. I'm sure anybody who works in that kind of business understands that's how that goes. And again, with the status card about, we get education, we get medical, that kind of thing. I would like to clarify some things. Okay, I do get medical. And again, whether you live on reserve or off reserve depends on how much medical coverage you get. On top of that, it is no different than what somebody on welfare in ODSP is being given for free. We get what's called NHIB. It is no different than ODB drug benefits. So I get no different coverage from the federal government than somebody on welfare and ODSP, but I will get spit on and yelled at for having free healthcare. The education pieces too. Yes, some of our children can get funding from provincial government, like OSEP and everything else, to go to post-secondary. The reason that is there was money set aside from the trust fund, because at 1%, at one time we had 2% of Indigenous population actually achieving higher level of education. So yes, they do cover, but even that, I'll give you an example. We all got kids. How many, put your hand up if you got one either in college or university or going, because this is my new adventure. They get $1,000 a month living allowance, no matter what their situation is, no matter where they live, whether they have children or not. So as the mamas in here who have ones in college or university, if you know where you're going to get a Toronto apartment, plus they can eat and all of that for $1,000 a month, then absolutely my son's getting free education. The problem is how people sell it, and what it actually is ends up being two different things, because I get it. A lot of people can't understand. This is Canada. What do you mean there's different laws for different people? I didn't understand it until I was older, and I had to understand that some things were just not the same for me. Those are the hard conversations. I mean, as women, oh my goodness, girls, you want to talk about a topic, murdered and missing Indigenous women. Number 1 on Canada's list. Indigenous women are the highest murdered women across Canada and missing. There is one whole highway in BC that women have gone missing repeatedly. And the problem we have is out there, it is actually believed it's the authority doing it. Because a lot of our Indigenous women were last seen in RCMP custody. That's the other thing as Canadians. A lot of people don't understand. Where did the RCMP come from? What was that all about? The RCMP was actually completely derived to enforce the Indian Act. That's why they have full jurisdiction over Indigenous people. And that's why when you see most conflicts on the news, it will involve Indigenous people and RCMP. Because Canada enacted the RCMP to control the Indigenous people. So, yes, there are certain things we get, I think, if that's what you want to call it. But it certainly doesn't come without a price. And it seems to me that most of that price is our dignity usually, because it's other people complaining that we get all this free stuff.
So I'm just wondering, why won't a government which is calling immigrants, why won't it allow Indigenous people, I mean, the native people to be a part? I don't know. Why won't a government allow them to be the citizens? What could be the reason?
It's essentially, I hate to say it, what we see in other countries, and a lot of people don't really want to see it or believe it in Canada, is that the government is actually the reason they're annihilating their Indigenous people strictly over the resources.
Okay.
We have become worth money. That was right from the beginning, the whole part of getting rid of the Indigenous people so that they would own the land, the water, so they could do all the strip mining, they could do their pipelines. There's nobody there to bother them if they own it.
That's true.
And that's why they keep enacting these laws that are getting stricter and stricter on Indigenous people. There's being laws passed every other week in the House of Commons against Indigenous people. Did you know if I have a family of 6 in my home right now, but did you know if 5 Indigenous people gather in a place that the police can say it's an organized terrorist thing and we can be charged under the Indian Act?
Oh my God.
So I could be out with my family, and because an officer chooses to feel that we're unruly, can arrest us because there's more than 5 of us. That law was only enacted 2 years ago. Another thing is what the Canadians forget is, let's talk about the beginning of COVID. What was going on in the world? Does anybody remember what the big news thing was at the beginning of COVID? The railroad was shut down across Canada by Indigenous people. Straight across Canada. Remember, Trudeau was screaming they couldn't get deliveries through. And then all of a sudden, the law came out that if you were not social distancing, you would be charged and fined. Under the law, guess who the first charges and fines went to under COVID regulations? All Indigenous protest sites was the first to be hit. Just like at the beginning of COVID, Trudeau wanted that seat at the UN. When the UN screamed at him to shut down Canada, he only shut it down because he thought he was going to receive that seat. When he didn't receive the seat, that's when he decided to start enacting new laws. And again, if you remember, the first words out of his mouth is, well, you know, things like ceremonies shouldn't be going on right now.
Unbelievable.
Our longhouses were shut down. We had people being charged at our sweat lodges for social distancing protocols. They were coming onto reserve territory to fine us at funerals. They would not let us in the hospital to do death rites to say goodbye to some of our family members. And we are the original people.
Excuse me, Kristie.
Unfortunate. So unfortunate.
Excuse me. This point was raised by one of the friends earlier also. You do have due representation in the federal government, or it's not there? Because that is the route from where you can start.
We do have a seat. That's our AFN chief. That's our national chief. Actually, we just had a new election, and are you ready, ladies? We have our first ever female AFN chief that is going to be going toe to toe with Justin Trudeau. The problem is Trudeau and the other people involved, like the Minister General, all those things, the Minister of Indian Affairs. That's the problem, is we have one voice and they tend to have a lot. Because all the other seats that have to do with Indigenous people are solely taken by politicians, like the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. If you Google him, I'm not exactly sure how much background he would have in living our life, but he seems to know. So again, we get into those kind of conflicts because, like in every conflict, you know, there's people who are supposed to be there to help make change that just get swayed by the government and things don't happen, as we've seen with Raybould. Honestly, I don't know how Canadians didn't wake up to that.
Because
they proved to the Canadian population how they would treat Indigenous people. They did it in front of everybody's eyes and nobody blinked. They treated that Indigenous woman horrifically for telling the truth, for standing by her people, for not lying. Every woman should have been in the street supporting that woman, because that's what that was all about. And the federal government made it so she had to run and be protected in her home community because they thought that for sure Trudeau was going to kill her.
Really?
There is a question from Asma. Asma has been waiting patiently.
Oh, go ahead.
No worries. Hi, Kristie. My name is Asma Khan, and thank you very much. Thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart for sharing all this important information with us. Kristie, I work with Muslim Women Council, and I work in another organization where part of my work is around diversity, equity, inclusion. And you know, a few of us were asking questions about, you know, why did this happen? And you know, I've been attending a lot of trainings, and one of the most important training was Indigenous cultural safety training. It was 8-week long, and my goodness, you know, I cannot tell you how touched I was. And in the, I think session 5 or something, they told us that this is going to be heavy, and it was a heavy training. It was delivered by, you know, a great speaker from the Indigenous community. And I, you know, all these trainings and, you know, whatever I've learned, and I think, and this is all about power and control and white supremacy that this happened, right? So that is huge. And as South Asians, I'm a South Asian myself, and I think we knew a little about Indigenous community before migrating to Canada. I've lived in the US as well, but I was not aware, and then I would agree with that. And then through media. So the role of media, because when we were back home, I think we all watched a lot of movies, like the Western movies, Clint Eastwood and all that, and the way Indigenous community was represented as and sorry if I because I don't know I'm using the right language, Red Indians.
Yeah.
So that was the term we knew when we came to the US or Canada, that we had no idea what, Aboriginal or Native or Indigenous community was, no idea. We just thought it was Red Indians. So again, thank you for giving us all this information. And I think there's a lot need to be done. Again, I work with another organization who's predominantly white, and the positive thing is they do acknowledge, and you will not believe it, our ED who just retired, very accepting of diversity, equity, inclusion. She was talking to me, and she said, Christopher Columbus said he discovered America. Well, why? How come he discovered America? America was already there, right?
Yeah.
So this was one thing, and I also liked when you said, I agree with you when you said you don't agree fully with the land acknowledgement. Yes, I do agree with that. You're absolutely right that nobody owns the land, the creation does. And just in the end, I would like to, and I would also like to involve Uzma and ask that as Mountain Women Council, as a group, will you give us the privilege to visit a reserve or a sweat lodge, when COVID ends, and so that's one thing. And also I'm very, very keen to attend a powwow. I know a powwow is a celebration. Pushing my organization, and we are waiting for COVID to be over. So as Mountain Women Council, can we all as a group come and attend a powwow and learn more about the culture? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. I would so love that.
Yeah, so Asma, thank you so much for bringing this. I have in my notes, I have written this. Kristie, would you like to tell about the event or celebration on August 21st? I saw on your Facebook, there is one, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, so in Kincardine on the 21st, there, Kincardine is actually hosting, and they're parking a fully Indigenous market because they want to bring all kinds of Indigenous. There's going to be booths set up, all different crafters and arts and stuff, but also education pieces, things like that. As to go back to the powwow though too, I would love to invite, and if anybody has the powwow when COVID opens up that they hear of, please send me a message, because one thing I didn't talk about yet is myself and my children are all traditional dancers. So we all dance different styles of powwow. My son River, who's in one of my books, who runs his own wonderful campaign about inclusion and equity and diversity and all of that. He's a hoop dancer, which is actually a medicine dance from the Hopi people down in Arizona. And he was given that gift of that dance because he's 19 and autistic, and he just got such a wonderful, wonderful light. But yeah, we do contest dancing because that's something big for powwows when you start getting into big contests. So yes, we're all competition powwow dancers. But then again, I would love to do a sweat lodge with all of you ladies too. Now that's some hardcore medicine. Maybe we should do a sharing circle like live first before we go into sweat lodge, but it would be incredible. We just love sharing that space, and especially as women, especially for Indigenous community, a lot of my own community is very matriarchal, right? And so it's very women oriented, and so just the love and the sharing, and we learn so much and all of that. So yeah, I would absolutely share in person when things open up with everybody.
I believe, Mitaji, you asked 3 questions, right?
Yeah.
This is almost 9 o'clock.
Yeah. I'm going to ask about the youth, how the youth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because
I forgot all about them.
They need to carry the, torch ahead.
So Unfortunately, we're seeing, I don't want to say unfortunately, we have two different things going on with our youth right now.
Okay.
We have some amazing youth rising. We have one young lady who's already been to the UN fighting it out about the water. She's from Wikwimikong, which is on Manitoulin Island. She's a beautiful young spirit, her. So we have a lot of our youth that are taking that step. On the other hand, we have very, very high numbers of right now of opiate addiction. We have a lot of young addicted parents, so the children are being raised. Actually, to go into a little bit of that, I have a 4-year-old little guy. I'm sure every now and then you may hear him in the background. I have a 4-year-old little guy that is what we call in kinship care. And that is a process that they're just starting with the Child Welfare Act for us. And that's where children can be put in placement with somebody within their family line. So his mother is technically my second cousin, but her and my daughter are the same age. So, I mean, they grew up in our communities. You always have these sets that are like the sister cousins and the brother cousins. And so it's always those sets. And those two were the set of sister cousins. I've had him since he was 2 months old because unfortunately his mother is on the street homeless and addicted. His bio father died a year ago on the streets of a fentanyl overdose. The biggest problem is a lot of these kids are aging out of care. And what that means is when they turn 21 under the Child Welfare Act, they just discard them. There's no more working with them. There's no follow-up. There's no nothing. And a lot of them are actually pretty much discarded at 16.
That's it.
So right now we have super high rates of death when it comes to suicide, when it comes to addiction and overdose. We have a lot of murders going on. The last couple months, I will tell you, my own family has been put through the ringer. We've had so much trauma happen between overdoses, suicides, natural deaths, COVID deaths. Unfortunately, right now for a lot of communities is everybody is in survival mode, just struggling and surviving, which is not so great for our youth or for any youth, as we know. And we don't know really what to do as communities because, again, what do you offer them? Because, like, as a mom, you want to offer your children everything in the world, but I'm not so sure you've had to raise your children the same. My son has had to know the name of his lawyer since he was 10 years old. He knows the name and phone number of his lawyer before he ever knew the name and phone number of a doctor, a mental health professional. Same with my daughter. My daughter is always, you can't go out by yourself. There has to be somebody with you. And then when you're on the reserve, it's like, it's so hard for them because there's not much to strive for. You can't strive to, oh, I'm going to get that good job and I'm going to own my house and I'm going to do this. No, you know, you're just probably going to be sleeping on grandma's couch till, you know, the next construction job you can pick up. And it weighs on us. The problem is, especially as Canadian peoples, as they're opening up things, I love the fact that Canadians are supporting more small businesses and more small Indigenous business adventures, like my books have a GoFundMe going. Because honestly, as I said, most Indigenous families are just struggling just to survive because of how the system is set up. We have women who are dying in the hospital because of how nurses and doctors are treating them. That was documented in the news not too long ago, multiple cases of that. So even as a system, when you go in, everything is supposed to be trauma ridden. So yeah, unfortunately, right now, I think a lot of our Indigenous families and our youth are unfortunately just in survival mode. And I can't wait for the day where our youth feel empowered enough to know that they're important and they deserve so much. They're so talented. But as I said, like, I mean, a month ago, we had an Indigenous male die in the jail here in London at the hands of the guards. We have numerous cases of that going on. And it's so rooted in system that we don't know what to tell them anymore, except for we're just proud of what they can achieve every day, that they can achieve something. But we're almost on damage control constantly. Like, we have checklists to go through. We're splitting up lists of cousins or siblings that we need to check in with, making sure we're checking in with our moms and our grandmas and grandpas and uncles, and just, making sure that if somebody needs to be held up, somebody's there to do that. Especially because, as I said, our elders, we're really worried about them, because this is traumas that they didn't deal with, they didn't want to talk about. It's in everybody's face, and they don't want to talk about it. And I don't blame them, but on the same hand, as I was saying, I think a lot of women need to remember that the connection to family and culture is through your stories. The stories you share with your children and their friends, even anybody, that's what's going to connect to culture and community further and further down in the generations.
Absolutely. We send lots and lots of blessings and good wishes to the youth. And of course, we will be at Malta Women Council making some efforts, definitely.
And I would like to say, all of you guys are just wondering, I wish I would have known about this group before. I would have come and visited a lot sooner. You all are so wonderful. Anybody have anything else?
Hi, Kristie. I just
Hello.
want to say, bravo to you. You share your story, you share your culture. Actually, MWC's purpose is to listen others, listen their stories, and help to find the solutions. That is our Mrs. Aloka's vision. But I feel very proud on our MWC today. I think we reach on large scale. So we are all with you. And I especially promise the government which one will support to Indigenous people, we will support them. As Meeta ji was saying, what we can do. So we can just put one vote towards Indigenous people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kristie, we will
Yeah.
invite you again and again. We need to learn. We know nothing about this culture.
I know.
Yeah.
I will say though, ladies, I know I was coming to share about my culture and stuff, but I do want to say to all of you, because I can't be here all the time, but I would love to be, please keep doing this. There's so many places that we need this sharing, loving space, whether it's amongst just women and men, everybody. I really honestly believe that just through that connection, especially, as women sitting here and sharing stories, we're all from different walks of life, different things, and they can be so similar that I think we forget, even in our children and cousins and family, or even walking down the street as women, nobody wants to be that complaining woman, especially an ethnic woman. We don't got time for that. And we all know that. We just don't. We have time to get stuff done and whatever. But please, please, mamas, take a minute, share with each other. You would be so surprised how something that seems so small to you can make such a difference to somebody else, because you might help them through something. And same with your children, right? This day and age, when we're talking about the youth and stuff, they're facing so many things that a lot of us have no idea. We never experienced it. Like, some of the things I hear from my children is just like, whoa, it seems so foreign. Share your stories, because even so, the world is so different from when you were little. There might be something in that story that may carry your child through something that you never even know they're going through. And I get, as women, we have a tendency, I mean, I get it. I'm that powerhouse mom. I really am. I'm horrible at sharing other situations than this. But again, I've just learned that through story sharing and those kinds of things, how much we can actually really uplift each other, how much support, how much we can learn about each other just by having our simple conversations. So it's amazing. And please, please, please keep this up. So whenever I need somewhere to run and have a girl chat, I can come in here.
So sweet.
Yes, yes, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, you come whenever. We meet every Wednesday, we meet every Friday, you know, over different sessions. So yes, keep in touch, Kristie, and come and join us whenever you have a moment, or you feel this is what you would like to do.
Oh, I will definitely be taking you up on that. Thank you again so much, guys, for inviting me. And I just really, really appreciate it. I just really love sharing. I love meeting new people. I love hearing all kinds of different stories. So yeah, and please, if you know anybody who's looking, you know, for Indigenous books or just cool books, The Adventures of Jay and Gizmo. The thing with the characters, and when we're talking about youth and stuff, is we always have, even if we don't want to admit it, we all have some quirky character when we were kids that we were just in love with. All through the generations. I mean, we can talk about all over the world, Popeye the Sailor Man, all those kinds of old cartoony characters that we all knew that none of us really think of now. And one thing I've noticed in the world is, as we become adults and the world's become the way it has with COVID and all of this other stuff, I think a lot of us have really forgotten about what it is to be a kid. And I think we all know we can say we are, but when's the last time, let's see a show of hands, when's the last time someone blew bubbles? Or colored in a coloring book? Or danced in the kitchen and sang at the top of their lungs? And that's what I mean. That's why I have Jay and Gizmo. So that way there is these two characters that kids can just relate with, that just scream, let's have fun and just learn something new about something different.
I encourage everyone to go to Kristie Facebook and see the details about the books and how we can get those books. And I think there is the GoFundMe for these with these books.
Is there GoFundMe for the books?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
What is your name on Facebook, Kristie?
It's under Kristie White. It's under my name. And then I have an actual Facebook alone for my books. And that one's under The Adventures of Jay and Gizmo.
Looking for you.
He's my friend. You can see that.
Kristie, I already sent you a friend request. So
actually, I was just looking. I'm like, I'm thinking somebody.
Did you see that? Yeah, I already sent you the request.
I was already searching for her name, but I actually spelled
it's
it
Kristie
wrong.
White. Yeah, it's under the same name.
I was putting it as Kristie.
Kristie, how can I give you a hug right now?
A group hug. A group hug.
Virtual
Group hug.
Virtual group hug.
It was amazing, Kristie. Thank you so much for taking time and being with us. So we are all here, right? And lots of love to you, your family, and entire community. That's all
Thank
we
you
can
so
do.
much. And as I said it, keep an eye on where I'm going to be. And believe me, if I'm in your area for anybody, come and say hi, please.
Sure. And I'm planning to come on August 21st.
Oh, yay!
I did actually attended a couple of your festivals. One time we were in Manitoulin Island, so over there I joined the community and we did dance with them. So when I heard 21st, so I'm quite busy at that day, so I won't be able to. But next time, if you can post it on your Facebook, I'll be there. I love the
Absolutely. And if you were at an event, if you were at a powwow at Manitoulin, I'm assuming it was the big wiki powwow. And if you've seen a young strut and hoop dancer, which is Wickwimikong's Brave, the youth ambassador, that's actually my son River.
I was there like 3-4 years ago we went there. So that time it was fun for us because that was the first time I joined, and then with my job I get to get connected with Indigenous peoples, which was very interesting, and I love it. Yeah.
Kristie, one of our participant, Surjit, she was there. She wrote an excellent, she expressed her feeling about the residential schools and things. She has gone, otherwise I would have asked her to read this, though it's in Punjabi, but we can translate it. So
I will come back to hear that.
Oh, yes. So every Friday we are here after 6:30, same link. You can come anytime you just want to say hi, you want to sit, chit, chat, chai, whatever you like. So
exactly. I'll be coming in to see who's blowing bubbles and coloring and playing with Play-Doh.
Yeah, we'll do that. Definitely. Okay, everyone. This is our, I think, longest session till now, and it's an eye opener.
Amazing, Kristie. You
have a good night, ladies.
Yeah,
you are an amazing person.
So are all of you.
May you be blessed with more strength and more power, and may we be blessed with more power to share your issues and be able to do something for the community.
Yes, Kristie, stay strong and keep doing what you're doing for your community, for everybody. So the next generation will thank you for that, and just keep doing and stay blessed.
Thank you.
Can I have official picture at the end? We usually do.
We have hearts, okay?
Yes. Mohini auntie, you can take off glasses for the picture.